Power Apps has a built-in rating control that uses extremely old icons from when Power Apps was first released. In this video, we're going to look at creating our own rating component using Fluent to design, and you'll be able to use any icon you want to display as the rating scale. Let's take a look. We'll first start by looking at the Fluent 2 documentation for this control. The rating is often used to communicate user sentiment. You might see a rating scale in a customer feedback form or when you fill out some sort of evaluation. In any case, it should allow our users to select their sense of value, their satisfaction, or their opinion for a particular item. Looking at the types of ratings, we have three main types that we'll build into our component. We have a rating display, which shows the scale, the numeric rating, and the count of how many results make up that rating. This would be used when displaying aggregated data. In the middle, we have a simple rating, which shows the rating scale. This indicates to the user that it's clickable via the outline of the ratings and the mouse changing to a hand on hover. On the right, we have a compact rating display. This version condenses the ratings into one icon so that it doesn't take up as much space on the screen. We still show the value and we still show the count of results making up that value. From these three types, we can see that the rating display and the compact display are only meant for displaying information. The user does not interact with these. With the middle rating scale, the user interacts with the control by selecting a rating. Today, we'll be creating these three experiences in our component. With the documentation of the rating component in mind, let's hop over to Power Apps and start to build. If you're not familiar with the stock rating component, you can see it on screen now. The style of this component is locked to displaying stars as the rating scale. And you'll see that these stars are an older icon that has very jagged edges. We can see that this control has a couple key properties. The default property is where we can specify how many stars should be filled when the control loads and before the user has made a selection. The max property allows us to specify how many stars make up our rating scale. We'll use both of these properties when creating our own component. We'll first navigate to our components and we'll add a new component named Fluent 2 Rating. We'll start by adding in some custom properties for our rating component. The first one we'll add is called Default, and this will be a number input. As we saw with the stock rating control, this will be the value that we provide to our component initially to show a rating. In the real world, this would be connected to a data source or a variable that contains a record. We want to make sure that we check the Raise on Reset when value changes checkbox for this property, as anytime the default value changes, we want to reset the component to grab that new value. Next, we'll add a property called Max, and this will be an input of type number. This will be how many icons make up our rating scale. Next, we'll add a property called Value, and this will be an output property of type number. This is the field that we can reference when we want to reference the currently selected rating to do things like updating a record in a data source. Now let's set some defaults for all of these custom properties. For the default property, we'll set this to 3. For the max property, we'll set this to 5. And before we can set our value property, we'll go to the Advanced tab for our component, and we'll go to the onReset property. We want to set a variable here called var_selected_rating, and we'll set this as self.default. This variable is going to contain the selected rating, and initially when the component is inserted on the screen or reset, we want to reset the value of this variable to the default property. After that's done, we can go back to our properties, and we can set the default value of the value property to var_selected_rating. We'll set the height of our component to 40 and our width to 250. These will be dynamic later on, but for now we'll just set them as these static values. And that should be all the custom properties we need at this point. We have a couple that we'll add later, but for now we'll move on to inserting our controls. First, we'll insert a horizontal container in our component named Container Ratings Component. We want to set the X and Y values for this container to 0. The width should be 200 for now, and we'll set the height to parent.height. We also want to change our border radius to 0 and our drop shadow to none. All the items in this container should be vertically aligned to the center, so we'll set that as well. Next, we'll go ahead and insert a blank horizontal gallery into our rating component container, and we'll name this gal ratings. When we think about the data source of this gallery, we need a table that has as many rows as we have in our max custom property for our component, since we should display that many ratings in our scale. We can use the sequence function to create this table automatically, and we'll set the value for this sequence function to fluent2rating.max. This will create a table with a single column counting up from 1 to the value in our max property, which we can see here. Next, we'll disable flexible width on our gallery, and we'll set the width to 200 for now. We'll also make this dynamic later on. For the gallery's height property, we'll set this to the center aligned option, and we'll set the height to parent.height. The template size should be set to 32. Inside our gallery, we'll insert an image named image icon. We'll set the width for this image to parent.templatewidth and the height to parent.templateheight. We want to make sure that the X and Y values for this image control are set to 0. But be sure to double check this when you reload your app after creating this component. You might find that Power Apps has changed the X and Y values even though you set them to 0, and you'll need to make sure that you make those changes again after reloading. One trick that we can take advantage of here is that we can set the tab index property of the image control to 0, and this will make our cursor change to a hand icon when hovering over the image. That will indicate to the user that this is clickable, and we don't have to overlay any button controls to accomplish this. Now we can go to the onSelect property of the image, and here we want to set our variable varSelectedRating to this item.value. That will update our selected rating to the sequence value of this item. So if this is the third star, it'll set it as 3. Now we need to set up our icons so that we can display them in our gallery. We'll create 2 more custom properties for icon outline and icon filled. These will both be inputs of type text. We're going to set the defaults of these now, and we'll have to take a detour to a website called fluenticons.co. This website has a library of Microsoft's Fluent 2 icons ready to be copied as SVG icons. These SVGs are what we can use in our image control. We'll search for star here and find that icon in the list. We'll select it and we'll choose Copy SVG, and then we'll go back to our Power App. For the default value of icon filled, we need to introduce that the code we're about to give is an SVG icon. For that, we'll enter a single quote, and we'll enter data:"image/svg plus XML," followed by a semicolon, and UTF-8, followed by a comma and a quotation. After this, we need to concatenate our encoded SVG information. So to do that, we'll add an ampersand and the encode URL function. For the value of this function, we'll enter a quotation and then we'll paste in our SVG code. We'll add our quotation and a parenthesis at the end to close the formula. Now this gives an error message, and that's because we need to replace all the quotation marks in our SVG code with single quotes. So for example, where width equals 24, we need these both to be single quotes. I'll go ahead and do that for all the quotes in our SVG's code. After replacing that, you can see that our SVG is now accepted. Towards the end of our SVG, you can see this text that says fill with a value. This is the color that our star is filled with. So if we want to change the color, we can input our own hex color code. I personally like 212121 as a base color, so we'll go ahead and use that. Now we're going to copy this entire code block and we'll go to our icon outline property. It's pretty easy to make this SVG an outline instead of a filled image, because all we have to do is change the fill property at the end of our code to stroke. Stroke is considered the color of the outline of the SVG, whereas fill is the color of the interior. Since the fill property is missing in this case, since we've replaced it with stroke, the inside will be transparent. Now we'll go back to our icon image and we'll set its image property as the following. If var selected rating is greater than or equal to this item.value, then we want the image to be fluent2 rating.icon filled. Otherwise, it should be fluent2 rating.icon outline. What this formula is doing is if the value of the selected rating is greater than or equal to the item's value, then we should have the icon filled. If not, it should be an outline. The value of this item in this case is just where it is along the sequence of numbers up to the max rating. With our rating image done, now we just need to set our gallery and component to size themselves automatically. We'll go to our gallery's width and we'll set it to self.allitemsCount times, in parenthesis, self.template width plus self.template padding, and we'll close our parenthesis and add self.template padding to this. This will make sure that the width always accommodates all the ratings that are shown. In our ratings container, we'll insert an empty container and call this container auto width. We'll set the height and width to 1, and then we'll set the width of our ratings container to container auto width.x. Right now our gallery is the only thing in this container, but this will be used when we create our compact and our display experiences later. Now we'll head to our component and we'll create a custom output property of type number, and we'll call this auto width. The default value of this property will be container ratings component dot width. With that created, we can then head to the width property of our component and we'll set this to self.autoWidth. This is now showing our rating experience where the user can select a rating. We'll go back to our app and we'll insert the control on the screen. You can see that it has a much more modern design using Fluent2 icons. We can select a star, and we can see that it fills the rating up to that star. We'll change the max property to 10, and we can see that it now displays 10 stars. If we change the default property to 5, we'll see that the control resets and the displayed rating is changed to 5. Again, the default property is what you would provide to this component from a data source record or a variable. Now you'll notice that when we increase the height, our stars don't expand to accommodate the new height. Let's add that functionality now. We'll go to our component and we'll add a new property for size. This will be a number input, and this will be how we give the component a size for our rating icons. We'll set the default value of this to 32. Now we'll go to our gallery's template size and we'll change this to fluent2 rating.size. Since our icon images are expanding to the gallery's template height and width, we can control their size from this component property. We'll also add a new component property for auto height. This will be a number output, and we'll use this to calculate how tall our component should be to expand the icons to their full size. We'll set this to self.size plus galratings.templateSize times 2. Since our gallery has some template padding, we have to accommodate that on the top and bottom of our component. So we multiply it by 2 and add it to our size property. We'll then set the height of our component to self.autoHeight. If we return to our app, we can see that when we change the size property to something like 48, the entire component resizes along with the icons inside. Now let's work on adding our display and our compact experiences. We'll go back to our component and we'll add two new custom properties. The first one is count, and this will be an input of type number. This is where we can provide the count of all the data points that make up our rating. We'll set the default value of this to blank. Next is a property we'll name type, and it should be a text input. This is going to have three options: rating, display, or compact. We'll add that to the description of the property so that you can easily reference it later, and we'll need to make sure that we select the checkbox to reset the component when the value changes. For the default of this property, we'll set it to rating. Next, in our rating component container, we'll add a text control called label display. We want the text to be middle aligned vertically, and we'll set the font weight to semi-bold. For the text of this label, we'll input var selected rating, so that's the value of the currently selected rating, and if our count property is not blank, then we want to show a bullet point as a separator, which we saw in the Fluent 2 component, surrounded by a space on both sides, and the value of our count property. Now we only want this text control to be visible if the type of the component is display or compact. So we'll set the visible property to fluent2rating.type equals display or fluent2rating.type equals compact. We'll also go ahead and move this so that it's in front of our auto width container. Now we also need to disable the user's input when the type is display or compact. We can do this by selecting our icon image and changing the display mode property to check if fluent2rating.type is equal to rating. If so, the display mode should be edit, and if not, it should be view. This prevents the onSelect property from triggering when the display mode is view. We'll copy the first part of this condition and go to the tab index of this image. We'll paste in that condition, and if it's true, we'll set the tab index to 0. If it's false, we'll set it to -1. This will prevent the hand cursor from showing even though the image is not selectable to the user. If we left it at 0, even though the display mode is set to view, the user would still see the hand cursor. Lastly, we'll go to the gallery's items property, and we'll add the following to the beginning. If fluent2rating.type equals compact, then we want the sequence to be 1. Otherwise, it can be our previous sequence. This is because in that compact version of the Fluent 2 rating, it only displays one icon along with the rating number and the count. Let's head back to our app now, and we'll go ahead and change the type of this control to display. Let's head back to our app now and try out these new experiences. And we'll change the type to display. You can see now that the rating is shown as a numeric value next to the rating control. We'll go ahead and change this to compact, and you can see it minimizes itself to one value with the numeric rating shown next to it. If I go to our count property, I'll change this to 150, for example. That 5 was the value provided, which in this case might be something like an average, and then the total making up that number is 150. These are two values then that would be provided by your data source. Let's go ahead and add another version of our Fluent 2 rating, and we'll go ahead and change the icon to a new icon. I have one copied here, so I'll paste that in, and then we'll do a quick Control H on our keyboard where we can highlight all of our SVG code. We want to find the double quotes and replace those with a single quote. And then over on the right-hand side, we can select this button so that it only will replace inside of our selection. Go ahead and replace all. And now we can see our new icon is shown here for the filled icon. We'll go ahead and copy this code and we'll go over to our outline property. We'll paste that here and we'll change the fill value to stroke. And now we can see our new icons listed. Let's go ahead and add a text control right below our component, and we'll reference in this text control our Fluent 2 rating component dot value. And so this should directly show the value that's being outputted from our component. So as I change our rating, we can see that it updates the number below. This value property is what you would use in a patch command to patch this information back to your data source. We'll go ahead and change the size of this to 52, and we'll see that the icons expand to accommodate their new size. We'll change the type to display, and now we can see our value shown next to our rating. When I hover over our ratings, we can see that the cursor no longer changes to a hand, so I'm not able to select any of these ratings to change the value. This would be in the instance of displaying a static rating from your data source. And that's about it. If you liked the video, please give it a like. And if you're interested in future videos like this one, be sure to get subscribed to the channel. I hope you enjoyed the video and have a great day.